It's time once again for a limited budget food challenge, and the budget for this exercise is going to be this, £2. And with £2 I'm going to try and buy food for myself for 2 days. So this will just be me, not Jenny, not the dog, not anyone else, just me. 3 meals each on 2 days, so 6 meals in total from a budget of £2. I'll also in this video be addressing some of the misconceptions that people had about some of the previous challenge videos. Now this wouldn't be a challenge without some rules and permissions. So to start with, I have £2 to buy food for 6 meals for myself, and that has to be 6 different meals. I can't just have the same meal 6 times. So £2 for 2 days is easier than £1 for 1 day, just because economy of scale is a thing. So to make that a little bit more difficult, we're going to have some more restrictions this time. So no travel by car, it's only going to be on foot, and that includes both the shopping and any wild food foraging that I do. Wild food foraging is going to be on the permitted list as usual, but my limited range on foot means I can't reasonably get to the coast, so that's a shame because I know there's some wild asparagus in season at the moment. Now so-called urban foraging is going to be out of bounds this time, so no surfing uncleared tables for condiments or sugar packets. Restaurants aren't open for indoor dining here at the moment anyway. So also forbidden are most of the many spices and ingredients that I've already got in my cupboards. So no curry powder, no stock cubes, no sugar, just 2 things, salt and pepper. I will allow myself to use anything homegrown that I can pick from my garden, but before you get all excited about that, we're only talking about a few evergreen herbs here: sage, rosemary, thyme, bay leaves. Oh, and rhubarb, I suppose, but I don't really see me eating any of that if there's no sugar. As usual, full use of kitchen facilities and equipment will be permitted, including the oven, hob and food processor. Water from the tap is also permitted. Finally, tea and coffee, but not milk. So those are the rules. Let's go shopping, starting with a 3-mile walk to Tesco. Now Sainsbury's is about half that distance from me, but more expensive. And I know people are going to say Tesco is more expensive than Aldi or Lidl, but here's the thing, that might be true when your shopping includes prepared meals, baked items, biscuits, coffee, cheese, fresh fish, frozen pizza. It definitely doesn't hold true when all you have is a couple of quid. The prices of basics, such as rice, pasta and the cheapest canned foods, in fact for all of the sort of items that can make a budget challenge work, are pretty much in lockstep across Tesco, Asda, Aldi and Lidl.
Good morning. The right side is to check out, from the right side is to check out. Thank you.
If I could just pause here, because something people always say on these videos is just get ramen noodles. I got so many of those comments on the previous videos. And yes, you can get ramen noodles for 14p in Tesco. But ramen noodles would be a fail in a challenge like this for several reasons. Firstly, they're just not very good value compared to some other foods. Even the flour I bought, or a bag of rice, is better value than those ramen noodles, in terms of the amount of food energy you get out of it. They're not very nutritious, they're not exactly a meal, and this challenge I have to make 6 different meals. So here's what I managed to get for my money. So I've got plain flour. That's a kilo of plain flour for 20 pence. It was an end of line or something like that, and they were reducing it down, so they reduced that down to 20 pence. So I actually got 2 of those. I was going to buy flour anyway. I was expecting to pay 45 pence for 1.5 kilos, I think it is. But I saw this and it's 20 pence for a kilo, so I got 2 kilos of flour. That's going to do me pretty well for my calorie budget, I should think. I got this, which is 500 grams of cooking bacon, as opposed to bacon for eating raw. So that's going to be my main protein. That was 75 pence. I've got 1 kilogram of carrots, which was 40 pence. I got a tin of baked beans in tomato sauce, which was 22 pence. The mushy peas have gone up in price actually since I last visited, so it wasn't worth getting peas instead of beans. It also wasn't worth getting spaghetti hoops in tomato sauce because although they are a lot cheaper than baked beans, they are not so high in protein, so they're not so nutritious. So I decided to splash out to 22 pence for my can of baked beans. I also got 2 bananas, but I'm not really very happy with the way the bananas looked. I may end up having to fry them, make fritters or something like that, because they look quite green and hard. I think I'll probably put them on the sunny windowsill and see if they ripen. But we've only got 2 days to play this anyway. And that lot came in total then to £1.98. So I have 2 pence change out of my £2 budget. So that's pretty good. We are obviously going to have to supplement this with some foraged greens and things, but that shouldn't be a problem at this time of year. There is also one more thing as well, which is a huge bonus to me, given that I've got flour to use. Which is, if you ask nicely at the bakery counter, they will give you fresh yeast. So I've got a block of fresh baking yeast there, live yeast. So I'll be able to make bread and probably dumplings and a few other things that need leavening, maybe pizza base or something like that, although we've got no tomatoes. But I will be able to make things that rise, hopefully, because we've got yeast. That was free of charge, so anybody can get that. Wasn't really urban foraging because that is something they do for any customer who asks, really. That's our purchased ingredients. So we've got that plus salt and pepper and water in the kitchen, plus whatever I can forage. All of this shopping I've done the day before the actual challenge, but I did go on foot to the supermarket. It was a 6-mile round trip and my feet are a little bit sore. It could have been done on the day, but of course then it would have disrupted breakfast and things anyway. So we will start tomorrow morning. Day 1 breakfast. I've got this bacon. There's not an awful lot of fat in here, so I'm going to have to try and save the fat for something I want to do later. Breakfast this morning, I'm going to try to make a kind of breakfast sausage burrito. I'm going to use about probably 1/4 of that bacon. And I'm going to try to see if there are any... No, there are no whole rashers in here, so that kind of limits what we can do with other things. I was going to look at making bacon wrapped bananas, for example, but there's none of this bacon is suitable for really wrapping anything up. It's all little bits. This bacon comes from the ends and trimmings of when they're slicing nice looking bacon to put in packets. So all the bits that are misshapes and don't really meet the grade end up in packs like this. I've got to say, it's not often as broken up as this. It's usually you do get some recognisable rashers in there, but not today. It's got a nice smoky scent to it, so it should have lots of flavour. I'm going to use about that much bacon, about a handful. The rest of this bacon I'm just going to put in this box now, and that can go back in the fridge until I need some more. I've got some sage and chives from the garden, just about 5 or 6 leaves of sage and 3 little strands of chives. And these are going to go into the food processor. I will snip up the chives because otherwise they tend to just spin around and end up whole in there. I'm hoping that later in the day and tomorrow we won't need to rely quite so much on homegrown flavourings because I'm going to get out and do some foraging this morning. So hopefully that will see us through for some additional flavours. Right, chives and sage are in there. We're going to have a good grind of black pepper, which is one of my permitted kitchen ingredients, and we'll give that a whiz around. Just going to form that into a kind of a patty, nice and thin so it cooks quick. And then I'll just fry this over a medium heat until it goes crispy, It'll shrink a little bit because this bacon's got a fair bit of water in it. Meanwhile, we've got to prepare some sort of flatbread. So this will be a completely unleavened flatbread. I suppose I have got yeast, but I haven't got time to do it. So I'm going to just go for half a cup of flour. Is that going to be enough? 3/4 of a cup of flour, and then just enough cold water to make a stiff dough. That seems about right. A little bit of flour on the board. And there's the dough. I'm not too worried about that. I'm going to reuse this bowl in a minute for starting the yeast. So let's get that. And we'll just get this bread dough, this unleavened bread dough, kneaded up a little bit. Actually quite difficult to knead such a small amount of dough as this, but we'll do our best. Okay, that doesn't take very long to come together. Now this is just general purpose flour, so this is just plain flour or all-purpose flour, and it's got enough gluten in there to make bread with it, which surprises some people. You can buy special bread flour, of course, which has a higher level of gluten in it, but you don't always need to. I might not actually need all of this, so let's have a go with half of it to start with. I'm going to try and roll it really thin. And this does need to be rolled out as thin as I can possibly go, because there's no yeast in here. It won't rise at all, except maybe from a little bit of steam as it cooks. So really, I'm just going to try to make it as thin as possible so it can cook quite quickly. Otherwise it will just end up like a brick. I suppose what we're making here really is kind of a chapati or something. It's looking good. It's coming out nice and thin now. Just got to move it around every now and again so it doesn't stick to the board. Maybe a little bit more flour. Okay, that's about as big as I'm going to go with this because I'm going to cook this in a pan. Over here at the cooker, the bacon sausage patty is starting to brown up a little bit. I've got a cast iron pan here on a nearly full heat. I'm just going to heat this up nice and hot, and we're going to try to cook the bread in here. So straight in with the flatbread. So I don't want that to be screaming hot, or else it will just toast on the outside and not actually cook the dough. While it's cooking on one side, I'm just going to roll out that other piece of dough. You can see that steaming now. And you can see we've got a tiny little bit of a rise there from just some trapped air or steam that was inside the dough. Okay, I'm going to take that out of the pan now because that's as far as I want that to be cooked for now. And then same thing with my other flatbread, into the pan. Just check in again on this sausage. Oh, that's looking good. This flatbread, I'm just going to give it a little bit of water. So I'm just going to, with a pastry brush, just moisten it all the way over. Baked beans. Not going to use all of these, obviously, because this has got to last me for 2 days, this can, at least for some meals. And I want the beans here, not the sauce. So I'm going to scoop out a spoonful of beans onto there. Maybe a bit more. That sausage patty is now done, so I'm just going to cut that into strips. And half of that will go in this one. So, and then I'll just fold that in, roll it up. Same deal with the other flatbread, which is a bit thicker. So these two rolled up flatbreads back into that pan that we cooked the bacon in. The remaining beans, I'm just going to put one of these plastic lids on from a Nutella glass. That'll go in the fridge. People do say you shouldn't put metal things in the fridge, metal containers. It's going to be just fine. This is overnight. It's going to be just fine. So just a little bit of toasting on the outside. Let's go and give those a taste. Okay, well, it looks like a nice cooked flatbread. Let's see what it looks like inside. I don't know. It could do with a bit of ketchup probably, but we haven't got that. Could have put a bit more sauce from the beans in there maybe. Anyway, let's give it a taste. It looks okay. Actually, that's really good. Surprisingly, quite a lot more moist than it actually looks. Okay, I'm going to finish up here and then we need to get that yeast started so we can make some bread. Fresh yeast. And it's like a sort of... it smells really nice actually. It smells like beer and baked things. A little bit softer than I think I'm led to understand it normally is. Anyway, I'm going to break up this yeast into a bowl. Now normally when you're going to reactivate fresh yeast like this and liven it up, you mix it with water and sugar. I don't have any sugar in the budget today, so I'm going to have to use flour. Hopefully fine. I've got some water here that is just hand hot. It actually feels neutral temperature when you put your hand into it. And we'll have a handful of flour in there. Rather than just being the yeast, I'm going to try and make a starter here. Just mix that up to break up all those lumps of yeast that were in there. A bit more flour, since we seem to have plenty of flour. Yeah, that'll do. Nice moist mixture there, but that's good because that gives the yeast a chance to really get going. So I'll cover that and leave it somewhere nice and warm, and hopefully we'll see that foam right up. Okay, this yeast I think was significantly more lively than I expected, and we can already tell just by tapping the bowl. It sounds sort of hollow, and it's foamed up already. So I'm going to actually make my bread dough straight into here. That's going to be 2 cups of flour. I'm starting to wonder if I bought a bit too much flour, to be honest. And about 2/3 of a cup of water. We're also going to have a good pinch of salt. Just mix that together, bring it together into a dough. And that's good. It looks a little bit dry, but that's just because the moisture hasn't kind of worked its way through all of the flour at the moment. So I'm not going to add any more liquid. That is the right amount. I'm not even going to need that right now. I'm just going to cover that and leave it for an hour while we go for a walk. So this is a little bit of mixed woodland, predominantly beech with a little bit of oak and birch mixed in. I'm hoping that here we will find some early fungi, either oyster mushrooms perhaps, or dryad saddle, maybe St. George's mushrooms, although it's a bit late for that and it's not really the right place. But anyway, we're going to have a scout around this woodland and see if we can find some fungi, some mushrooms to eat. So plenty of fallen wood here, but no fungi, or at least not so far. So drawing a blank on that one. The only fungi I've found is birch polypore over there, which is sadly not edible. So we have to traverse a field of curious cows and calves, so we must stay away from the mother with calf because they can be a little bit protective. Doggo on the lead because I don't think she'd chase them, but they might get frightened if she's running around. Got lots of stinging nettles here and white dead nettle. Those are all edible. In fact, there's lots of dock around as well, which is also edible, especially when it's young like this. I'm not going to pick that just for now because I'm hoping for something a bit better. This plant here is red dead nettle, and it's obviously a relative of that white dead nettle we saw. Again, edible, has a kind of herbal taste, but again, I'm not picking that yet. I've got some other ideas. This is another edible here. It's growing by a roadside, so I'm not going to pick it here. This is crow garlic. It looks like a big version of chives, except the thing that differentiates it from chives is if we look closely at the leaves, they're kind of ridged. It can be cut and used exactly like onions or chives when it's like this. I wouldn't pick it here by a roadside, but it grows everywhere. Prefers sort of well-drained soil, grows on banks and sandy places. I'm not going to pick any just yet. We will see if we can get some later. Here's something I will pick a bit of though. This is Ramson's wild garlic, or bear garlic, or bear leek. Good stuff. And this is the reason I didn't buy onions, because I knew this stuff is in season. And I knew I'd be able to pick it in abundance. Look at it all through there. So, let's grab a bit of this. Alright, that was not quite as fruitful as I hoped. Got my wild garlic, which is good. I shall use a lot of that. But I was kind of holding out for wild mushrooms of some sort. There are a few species that you can find at this time of year, but we just weren't lucky today. So I'm going to go and give the bread a little knead, and then we'll go back out. I've got another spot I can visit, and we'll see what we can find there. Okay, let's check in on this bread. Oh, hello. Yep, that's doubled in size easily, and you can see it's got a bit of a spring to it. We're going to take that out and give it a knead now, because that hasn't actually been kneaded at all. I only mixed it there on the initial mixing. It smells fantastic. It smells really yeasty, almost alcoholic. And you can see there was a little bit of wet, there was a little bit of dry ingredients at the bottom of the dough, but that's just been incorporated in now. Now, normally I would add a little bit of oil of some sort to bread, but we don't have any, so I won't. So this is bread made without oil. It'll work. It won't keep as well, but it doesn't need to. Yeah, and that's really gone quite nice and stretchy now, and I've hardly done any work on that at all. And it's actually it's still tearing a little bit, but it is plain flour rather than bread flour, so it will do that. So I'm just going to knead that for a minute or two, and then back into the bowl, cover it, we'll leave it for another half hour. Well, some lovely nettles here, so I'll pick a few nettle tops, that's for sure. I'll pick them from the back of the patch, and then they can be guaranteed to be relatively clean and free from animal wastes and soil splash from the path. Here's something to look out for when picking nettles. That leaf there is all closed up and kind of sewn shut, and it's most likely that there's a caterpillar in there. So I'm just going to be careful and not pick that one. This plant down here is hogweed. And there are two different kinds of hogweed. There are giant hogweed and regular hogweed. This is the regular kind. And when we pick the little shoots like that, they can be steamed and eaten as a vegetable. People say eaten like asparagus. It doesn't really taste like asparagus. The flavour is more like somewhere between carrot and parsley, with a slight taste of aniseed. So I'll pick a few of these, because they're going to be perfect for what I want for lunch today. This plant here is called lady's smock, or cuckoo flower, and as you can probably tell from the flowers, it's a member of the cabbage family, or cabbages and mustards, and from the leaves you might be able to tell it's related to watercress, and it has a similar sort of flavour to watercress and radishes and so on. Now, there's not much to it, but I will pick a few of these leaves down here, because they're going to give me a sort of radishy mustard type of vibe in the food that I want to cook here for lunch today. The flowers are also edible actually as well, so, but I'm not going to take those, I think, because there's not many of these plants about, so I'm just going to pick a few little bits. Now that I've found it in slightly greater abundance, I am going to actually pick some of these flowers, because as I say, they're edible as well. So we'll just take those stalks off where they snap, and got to be careful because that there is buttercup. That's not edible. This here is lady's smock, which is edible. Very important not to just indiscriminately pick things, because plants tend to grow up amongst each other, and some of them are poisonous and some aren't. It would be a shame not to take a few of these lovely dandelions that are in full flower, although I can tell the bees are enjoying them too, so I shan't take too many. So here's a clear example of why you've got to be really careful. This plant here is cow parsley, and this is edible. I'm not going to use any of it today, but this is an edible wild plant in the carrot family. We also picked hogweed. This is hogweed here, and again, another edible wild plant in the carrot family. Also in the carrot family is this lovely parsley looking plant here. Unfortunately, that one will kill you. That's hemlock water dropwort. It has tuberous roots that look a bit like parsnips, and parsley-like foliage, and it's deadly poisonous. So you can't just, there are no rules of thumb with foraging. You can't just go and pick things that you think smell good or look good. You have to actually be able to identify the species and figure out exactly what they are and know what they are, and then you'll know whether you can eat them or not. Time for a bit of controversy. This is Japanese knotweed, and it's a very invasive weed here in the UK. It doesn't belong here, and it tends to spread in damp and wet places. So it's growing here by the side of the river. This is edible, at least the small shoots are. Can be cooked like rhubarb apparently. I'm in two minds about whether to harvest any of this and take it home, because harvesting it and taking it home runs the risk of spreading it. So I think I'm probably going to leave this. It would add some much needed acidity to some of my dishes, but I'm just not going to take it home because I don't want it growing in my garden. Here's something we will have a bit of though. This is garlic mustard, or hedge mustard, or Jack by the hedges. It's got many names. So I'm just going to pick some of the tender tops of that, because these are going to be perfect. They've got a kind of mustard, or some people say slight garlic aroma. They're not related to garlic, they are related to mustards. But that's going to go well in the things I'm cooking today. So we're going to give this bread dough one more little knead, shape it into the final shape we want for the loaf. It's going to need a bit more flour. Just give it a little knead, just to knock back the air out of it, which will help to even it up. Okay, and then we just form that into a kind of a loaf. I don't have any oil, so I'm going to put it on a non-stick tray. And then we'll cover that and leave it to prove for, well, about an hour, or until it's doubled in size. Okay, my bread's got to go in the oven in a minute. I'm not really all that happy with how much that's risen. But anyway, I'm going to bake it. I think it'll be okay. I think it might just be a bit dense, but that'll be fine. And while that's cooking, I'm actually going to bake some carrots as well. I've got these carrots, I've just peeled them. I could do something with the peels and ends. I could make some more stock, but I don't think I need any more stock, so I'm just going to discard those bits, apart from one little bit that we'll save for Eva. And I'm just going to roast these in the oven at the same time as the bread is baking. Just really saves putting the oven on twice. Right, let's take a look at this bread. Well, it's a bit wonky, but it has risen, so I think that's enough of a bake. It's not very golden on top, but I'm not going to bake it much longer, or else I think it's just going to dry out. So yeah, that's a pretty pale loaf, but it is cooked. And of course it's pale because there's no oil in there, it's just flour, water, yeast, a little bit of salt. It'll be fine though, because I'm actually going to be toasting most of this. So these are the carrots, and without oil they have really just shriveled up, and they've kind of turned into carrot jerky. But that's fine, because the flavour will have just concentrated in these, so they'll hopefully be nice and chewy, but at the same time really sweet. So I don't know what I'm going to use them in yet, but I thought it might be useful to have that on standby as an ingredient I can add into something else. So the wild garlic I picked is kind of, some of it's a bit past its best. Once it starts to flower, it goes downhill pretty quickly, and so you can see that some of the leaves are starting to yellow at the edges. We've got brown spots on the leaves, but that won't be a problem. Just going to rinse to get rid of any soil or anything like that. And we'll separate it into stems and leaves so that the leaves all start in about the same place. That's entirely stem because that was a flower. There we go. Like that. And these leaves, I'll just chop up roughly. And I'm going to go into a pan because I want to make some broth. Also into my broth, I've got my nettle leaves here, which you'll see I'm handling with gloves because they will still sting you. Oops, that's a bit of the lady smock. We'll save that. And again, I'm just going to roughly chop these nettle leaves just so that they will release some of their flavour into the broth. This is the garlic mustard, or hedge mustard, or Jack by the hedges, or whatever you want to call it. I'm just going to taste a little bit of that leaf. Yeah, just kind of like turnip tops really. So I think we'll put most of that in the broth. And also these hogweed shoots here, well, I think what I'll do with them is I will save the smaller, more tender ones with my stalks here, and the slightly tougher ones, not that there's a lot of difference, will go into my broth pan. Now, water, pinch of salt, fresh bay leaves from the garden, which I'll just bruise a little bit. Now, normally if you're cooking green vegetables like this, you'd look for them to be crisp and fresh and bright green. We're actually going to cook this until all the goodness comes out into the water. Next, I've got my cast iron pan here. I'm not using non-stick for this. And into there, a little bit of this bacon. Let's say about another quarter of the pack. Meanwhile, over here, we've got those stems of garlic and hogweed. So with these, I'm just going to chop them very fine. Just so there's no tendency for anything here to be fibrous, I'm going to cut it into short pieces like this. Similarly, with all of this flour stuff here, so we've got the cuckoo flour, we've got the garlic mustard, and we've got the leaves from the cuckoo flour. I'm just going to chop that roughly. All of that's going to go into a bowl here. Next, I've got a couple of carrots that I've just washed. They're quite nice carrots, so I shall eat the skins. But we'll just trim off the stalk end there. That will go in the stock pot. Just gonna actually squeeze out the juice before putting the grated carrot in with the other vegetables. The juice and all the rest of the little bits of carrot are going to go in the stock pot. Just snip up some of those bigger bits of bacon because it'll help them to cook and render the fat out of them quicker. And then also into here we're just going to have those dandelion petals, just the very soft yellow parts off the end. We don't want any fluffy bits or green bits, we'll just have the yellow petals. Not sure this will really make any difference at all, but it's just a bit of colour and they probably do have some vitamins in them. Now as you can see, a little bit of fat has rendered out of this bacon, which is good, and that's probably our most scarce resource on this couple of days, so I'm going to spoon that off and reserve it. Right, two things now. This bacon is as cooked as I want it to be, so that's going to come out carefully onto this board, and we're certainly not going to waste all that flavour that's in the pan, so just going to cover that with water and let that sit, and all of this sticky stuff, salty bits from the bacon will deglaze, and that's going to be a very important part of the broth that I'm making. It would be good if I had soy sauce, but I don't. I've got salt and I've got bacon, so I've just got to kind of wing it. Meanwhile, the bacon I'm now going to chop up. Just run the knife through it again and again until it's very small pieces. Yeah, I know I should probably put a cloth under the chopping board to stop it sliding around, but it's bothering me less than it's probably bothering you. And now that is going to go into the mix with the chopped vegetables. Right, the deglaze from the bacon pan can go into that glass. Oh look, we're going to be making dough again. So, heaped quarter of a cup, maybe a bit more, of flour. And we'll start with a quarter of a cup of water and bring that together into a dough. And I want quite a firm dough for this. Yeah, I think we're about there actually, so I'm just going to squash that down to make it absorb more of the flour. You want a really nice firm dough here. And I'm going to give that a good knead because I want it to be quite strong. Now we're just going to season this with a good bit of pepper and a little bit of salt. There is quite a bit of salt in the bacon, but there's not much bacon in there. And just give that seasoning a mix in. Let's divide this dough into pieces. I don't know, maybe like that. Let's see how that works. And then with plenty of flour on the board, roll it out into a nice thin circle. And a spoon for that filling there. Wet the edges of the dough. And bring that over. And then hopefully what we'll end up with, if I do this right, is something a bit like pierogi or a bit like dumplings. The first one's not going that great actually, but plenty of time for improvement. Just pinch those edges together, and then in my pan here, just going to add back in a little bit of that oil, well, fat from the bacon. Grease the bottom of the pan with bacon fat, and then we'll stand those things up in there. Just going to double crimp those edges like that. Just kind of fold them over back on themselves and crimp them round. I'm expecting that some of these might burst open as they're cooking because I think I might have overstuffed them. We'll see. This herb broth has been cooking for an hour now. Just going to strain that off. Lovely golden colour. And what we've got basically is a vegetable stock here. My dumplings are ready, they're in the pan. We will just give them a tiny bit more, especially in the middle there, of that bacon fat, just around, because I'm going to fry them first and then steam them. Okay, they've just got a little bit of colour on the bottom now. That's as far as I'm going to take them. So this is the deglaze from the bacon pan. I'm just going to pour in there. And then we'll put in some of our vegetable stock as well. And then a lid on, and we'll just steam those, kind of poach and steam those for 10 minutes or so until they're tender and fully cooked through. Now, I wouldn't dream of telling you these have the delicacy of gyoza or even of pierogi, but they look good, don't they? I'm actually looking forward to having these. They're puffed up quite a bit, including the flour, probably because I didn't roll it very thin. The broth has reduced down, and probably some of it's soaked in as well as it's cooked. So I've added a bit more broth, but that's going to have concentrated the flavour. So I think, yeah, we're done. They are cooked. We're ready to serve. Well, they haven't stuck to the pan, that's good. But they are slightly browned on the bottom, which is also good. Steaming, cooked vegetables inside with lovely smoky bacon. They smell fantastic. It tastes amazing. Wow, those wild herbs. The garlic has just softened enough to take the edge off of it, and that cuckoo flour is surprisingly radishy. And where some of them are just toasted a little bit on the bottom, that's also really good. And do you know what? That broth is incredible. I mean, that is half and half bacon broth and then vegetable broth, but it's just bursting with flavour. Just incredible. Rich and complex and deep. Yeah. And left over from that, I've got a jar of that stock, the veggie stock left, and a little bit of bacon fat in there, which is now solidified. So I will save those because you never know. Well, end of day one, and I just fancy beans on toast. And why not? So my weird dense bread here, which didn't rise symmetrically, I probably should have cut that cross a bit deeper. But, well, it's bread. It's recognisably bread. It's got a spring to it. It's got a rather doughy interior. but it's going to be okay. While that bread's toasting, just going to transfer some of my beans into this pan. I don't want the whole can. Probably about another third of a can I think will do for these 2 slices. Please excuse the general state of carnage here on the worktop. There's been a lot of flour and dough and stuff worked here today, and I haven't really been very diligent about clearing up. But it's fine, I'll have a big wash down at the end of the day. Okay, I think that might be long enough in the toaster. It hasn't gone particularly brown, but it is nice and crisp. And then beans with their sauce on top. It's really not very elaborate. And since we are not wanting to waste a single drop, I'm going to use the rubber spatula to get the rest of the sauce out of the pan here. Okay, beans on toast. Okay, well, hardly needs an introduction, although I imagine probably to people outside the UK, beans on toast may remain a mystery forever. These Tesco cheap beans have got rather a lot of sauce, but that actually works quite well with this dense, dryish bread. Yep, that's a perfectly acceptable little supper. So that's the end of day 1. And now in day 2, we've got to try to make 3 more different meals. Got about a third of a tin of beans left. We've got nearly a whole bag of flour, about half the pack of bacon, and most of the carrots. So I think we're going to be okay. Now, it is decreed in this house that no one shall eat toast without paying the toast tax. Good toast. So that's the end of day 1. And there are a few mistakes in there, most notably that bread, which just was a bit of a disaster really, and that's because I used too much yeast. We'll reflect more on that at the end of day 2. If you're watching this at the time of upload, day 2 will be tomorrow. If not, it's already in this card and video description. Thanks for watching, and I hope you join me tomorrow for day 2.